I'm actually one of those weird people who enjoys the morning. Like, there's something about the way it's so unsurprising. Like, the moment I leave the house, I have no idea what's going to happen, but every morning has this simplicity, this routine, this consistency about it. I speak pretty regularly at this one college. It's the same college every year, and I noticed something. There was this girl on the worship team, and every time I came there, it seemed like she was different. Not like in a fake different, but it seemed like even though she was just one of the singers on the worship team, she would get more passionate, it seemed, every week. And I was surprised by that because, you know, I speak and I go to different places and it can get routine-ish. And so I finally approached her one day. I go, you know, even though you do this every week, it seems like it's really fresh to you every single week, and it's new to you every week. And I just asked, how do you do that? And she said something really interesting. She goes, when I have like a great time with the Lord and worship, I never say, God, give me what I experienced last week. Duplicate what you do it again, what you did last week. She goes, instead, I say to him, God, you are a creator. And would you create something new in my worship experience with you? Would you give me a whole new perspective of you this time when I worship? And I thought, wow, that is so cool. I never thought of that aspect of God being a creator and wanting to create something new. And I thought, why don't I do that even when I pray, even when I have times alone with the Lord? Why don't I just pray and say, God, this time when I pray to you, this time when I spend time alone with you, I want us to be more intimate than ever before. Would you create a whole new experience with you? Would you expand my understanding of you? And it's pretty interesting. If we were to really do that and focus and put that type of effort into it, I just think, what would our relationships with God be like at the end of our lives? When I was growing up, I remember every night we'd sit around the dinner table and my dad would make us pray every night before we ate. The crazy thing about it was we would pray the exact same prayer every night, like word for word, no variation. Either I would pray it or my brother would pray it or one of my sisters would pray it, but we would say word for word. And I know that means nothing to you, but every night, word for word, and so it became this pattern, and it got to a point where I would pray it before breakfast, before lunch. Every time before I ate, I would have to pray that magical Chinese prayer of God bless this food, because I didn't want him to poison it. And I look back at that and I think, wow, that's so ridiculous. Without exaggerating, I bet you I prayed that prayer at least 5,000 times over my lifetime, word for word. In fact, I remember one time, and this was the stupidest thing, I remember being in junior high and I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I believed in God. I was embarrassed to pray, but I knew we're at lunch and we were at this amusement park. It was a field trip. I still remember it. We were at this place called Great America, and a bunch of my friends were at this table. We got our food and our drinks, and I'm thinking, I gotta pray before I eat, but I don't want anyone to see me. And so I still remember dropping my fork on purpose just so that I could bend over and pick it up. And on my way down, I'd be like, and no one would notice, and then I could eat my food. It's like, oh, good, it's blessed now. And you probably haven't done anything that stupid, but I think we all get into some sort of routine in our prayers to where it can become meaningless. Whether it's before meals or maybe you have a morning devotional time and you almost just sink into this prayer mode without thinking about what you're doing. And I think it hit me when I was in high school. One time I was at this kind of Christian retreat, and early in the morning I got up to pray and have my devotional time with God. And I remember sitting down, started to pray, started to read, and then I looked across the field and I saw the camp speaker, the guy that was giving all the messages that week. And he was across the field and he was praying and reading. And for some reason in my mind, I started thinking, I bet you he prays differently than I do. Because, you know, as a kid, you look up to these guys that are at the pulpit and you think, wow, he's the speaker, he's the pastor, he must have such an amazing relationship with God. So I thought to myself, I bet you he prays differently. I bet you he is so close to God when he prays. I bet you he really thinks that he's in the presence of God. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to pray like that this time. And I actually pictured myself speaking to someone, speaking to God. And it's weird, but I realized up until that point, I don't think I ever considered the fact that I was speaking to a person when I was praying. It became this routine or ritual to me. And so it began this pattern in my life where I thought, you know what, I want to think about him every time I pray. I want to think about who I'm speaking to because it makes such a difference. And what was crazy was the more I studied the scriptures, the more I read the Bible and I would read these descriptions of God, the more it would change my prayer life because I would picture God differently. I would see him differently. It's like I remember when I first studied Revelation chapter 4 and I read John's description of God, of what it was like when he was in heaven. And he talks about how he saw this being sitting on this throne, but he said he's not like a normal flesh and blood person. He's like diamonds and rubies, and he's glowing, and there's lightning, and there's fire, and there's thunder, and there's 100 million angels, and so it was such a massive picture of God that after reading that passage, I remember closing my eyes and thinking, okay, I'm about to approach him. I'm about to come before him and speak to him. And so I'd close my eyes and I'd picture this being who's sitting on the throne and he's glowing with diamonds and rubies and he's this unapproachable light and there's lightning, thunder, fire, and angels all around. And then I pictured myself coming before that being and speaking to him. And it was like I didn't even know what to say, and these words came out of my mouth. Like, it's such an honor to come into your presence. And I just, ever since that day that I read that passage and prayed, I thought to myself, I would never have said those words if I didn't take that 30 seconds to think about him. And I want you to consider, what would be the first words, literally, the first words out of your mouth the moment you saw God in all of his glory? What would come out of your mouth? See, and that's what should come out of our mouths when we pray. Because what we're doing is we're coming before that God and speaking to him. In your discussion group, talk about what you think would come out of your mouth the moment you saw God. Like, what would be the first words you would say if you literally saw him? And also, after reading chapter 1, hopefully your relationship with God was different this week, that your prayer life was different this week. Talk about that. Talk about how it was different, or maybe if your relationship with God wasn't different enough, then talk about how you'd love to see it change.
Welcome to Wednesday's Word, or the Word for Wednesday. Hey man, you checking it out? Like we got a word for Wednesday, like we checking it, man. We doing it, we living it, we giving it, we're gonna go with it, we're gonna listen to it, we're gonna hear it, we're gonna do it, we're gonna be it. Yeah man, that's what we do, check it. But no, seriously, Wednesdays, we like to get together in the Word, about the Word, by taking a word and understanding it in a better way, in a more complete way, in a perspective that really beats with the heartbeat of God. Something that comes from above, that reaches down within, that grasps us by the gonads, that gets a hold of our ear, hangs onto our heart, and makes us shoot off our mouth in a way that's more pleasant than what we would have done had we been in control of our tongue anyways. And that word today is, dare I say, God. You know, God. God. Yeah, you've heard of God before, haven't you? You know the word God. You know God. You know the Father. Or do you? Now see, that's what we're going to talk about. How well do you know our Father which art in heaven? You see, there's a lot of people that wander around saying kind of some weird things about some other things that they talk about things that they don't know what they're talking about. You know, YHWH. What was that again? YHWH. Tehelat Hashem. Sidur. Good. Now I'm looking at my Jewish prayer book. And I'm kind of like thinking about this. And I'm really looking at the Hebrew going, W? Really? Surely you can't be serious. So you see, sometimes I wonder, what are you talking about? God. And I hope you have a sense of humor. Because a lot of Jews have had to put up with a lot of bad theology for a long time, listening to some really weird ideas. You know, like Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Yahweh, Yahuwah. You know, and all the Pentecostal weird ways that they're coming up with now that they've got this kind of weird versions. They're coming up with all kinds of strange things. And it's all based upon the idea that somewhere somebody was dumb enough to let somebody get away with putting the wrong letter in the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong people to hear it. So now we've got some really weirdos and wackos running around going, Yahweh, love Yahweh. Do you realize that there's no W in Hebrew? Can I say that again? You know, a W has like, You know, it looks like a 3 kind of fingers. There's no 3 fingers. 2 fingers, not 3 fingers. Can we say that again? 3 fingers looks like a W. 2 fingers looks like a V. The V is a V. There's no V but a V because there's no Wawa except for baby talk. In Hebrew, there's no Wa. There's Yahweh. Jehovah came from the idea of putting the right letter, but they forgot the other part. You see, they put a J where there's a Y, but they changed the W back to a V where it should be. You see? You don't see, do you? Jehovah God, like they used to say, was what they called the Yud-Hey, Vav-Hey, which is the letter that's there for God. Now, before we get all Hebraic on you and Hebraicized and think that the Hebrews are better than the Jews, or the Jews are better than the Gentiles, or the Christians are better than the Evangelicals, or the Protestants are better than the Catholics, and that somebody's got it all right, let's just clarify that everybody's got it all wrong. Now you're all going to crucify me, aren't you? Not. You see, I got my hermeneutic down. I know what I'm talking about. Who you're talking about, I'm not so sure sometimes. Because you see, there's a scripture that says, now you are gods, but you will die like men. So where are you going? Just saying. So whenever somebody tells me God, I kind of, have to start putting on my earmuffs and start not listening to what they have to say. Because you see, everything we know about God really is boiled down to what we read or what we think we know until we actually take a closer look. So that's what we want to do on Wednesday's Word is we kind of want to get to know God a little bit better at the end of this than we did at the beginning of this, because God has a word for us. It's called, and it's not God, but it's called God. You didn't see that coming, did you? You see, Jesus didn't say that he came from God. He said, I come from my Father, because he had already seen what men who happened to be Jewish could do to the word God and mess that up. He'd already heard all the prayers offered up to God and realized, being in heaven, standing next to God, that nobody's listening because nobody's paying much attention to kind of like the wrong thing being said in the wrong way at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. Because really it's about the right attitude of the heart and the right perspective of just being and knowing who you're talking to and humbling yourself more so than I'm going to pray to God with a big G and a little O and a big D. Or is that with a G and a hyphen and a D? Or is that kind of, we're going to put the Yud here and no vowel, and the Hey here and no vowel, and the V here and no vowel, and the H here, and just say that that's God's name? I got news for you. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, doesn't have a name. He just has his own being. You see, the YHWH was never meant to be his name. It's not a name for God, it's a name of God. It's a name of God's attributes, God's being, what God is, how God relates, and how God personifies himself to his creation. I am that I am is what most Gentiles will translate, or most Christians will translate the Hebrew into. But Jewish sages know that looking at that could just as easily be translated, I will be what I will be, as it's translated in the Hebrew Bible. I will be what I will be. I am that I am. Extant as I am I extant. And there's a popular movie coming out, so that's why I want to use the word extant. Because that's really what the Hebrew phrase that's used to describe God is when he was talking to Moses. Moses knows this, and he got it kind of confused, because he was going with what they know about Moses, and that was quite a bit of kind of like, started off with 10 Commandments and comes down with 613. Somewhere somebody was making something up along the way. Or were they just making it up as they went along? It's kind of like, when we have the Constitution supposedly so perfect that we had to add, revisions, the amendments, amending this and amending that and amending that. Well, they didn't get it right the first time? Okay, well, but keep amending it, and re-amending it. If you look at the amendments, there's one that started something and then ended something. I think it's called prohibition, isn't it? Oh, okay. They're going to do that with pot now. But my point is this. We're talking about God. You see, people's perspective of God was always directive towards their experience of God. So God dealt with his created being, whoever it was that was approaching him, in the way that they best understood him. Moses couldn't understand him any other way, so hey, you got a burning bush, buddy. But Moses knew there was more to this burning bush than met the eye. He was nobody going to Oz. He knew there had to be more to this bush than just some fire consumed and not consuming the bush. So he says, I want to see you. I don't want to see no, like a burning bush, man. I want to see you. And finally God gave in a little bit, kind of said, cleft of the rock, step back, watch out, pass him by, and he saw his after parts. I don't want to think about that, but his train filled the temple, so I guess that's okay. So Moses, in dealing with God and having conversation. Now, the conversation is pretty simple to understand from a kind of scientific point of view, if you would examine it scientifically. God says, I am that I am, I will be what I will be, tell them that I am, or the person that I am is coming, and that he is with me, and this is the, he didn't say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he said the God of your fathers. So, saying I am wasn't really what God was saying I am to call himself. He was saying that I exist. I am the being that the best that you can understand or comprehend is simply to say, I exist. Now, if you look at Genesis, you kind of know that because it says in the beginning, God. Well, when? Before the beginning? After the beginning? When does God begin? Well, you don't ask that because God doesn't say that. God says in the beginning, God. Or in the beginning, Elohim, or YHWH. So you got to figure that one out. So you get to Elohim. So it's more about the plurality, the neutrality. Kind of like, well, wait a minute now, that's different. What's this God difference between Elohim, Elohai, Eloha, and all the Ellas, and Ella Fitzgerald's kind of wondering herself, going, excuse me? Are you calling me? No. But when we're talking about God the Father, when we're talking about the Yud, He, Vav, He, which is the Hebrew letters Y, sort of, that's close enough to Y, kind of, H, which is kind of like that, Vav, which is kind of like that, He, which is an H, Yud, He, Vav, He, and it's pretty simple for a Jew, because we understand that. But when you change it to a W, it gets a little confusing. So I kind of question that, because then people start getting weird by making up Yahweh when it should be Yahweh. Okay. And then they make up weird stuff, like Jehovah, which is like, there's no J, so if you were talking about Jesus, I guess you'd say Jehovah. So you got Jehovah, Jesus, and Jew. What are you going to call the Spirit of God? Oh, okay, I got you. You don't. Okay, that's fine. Now, there's reasons why they came up with the J, and it has a lot to do with the Germans, and it has a lot to do with English, and English is a bastard language that's made up as it goes, because it's really not a formal language. It's a converted, perverted bastardization of the proper King's English. If you knew that, then you understand it. But if you don't, well, it's a mishmash of kind of what now we call advertising, gimmicking, realizing that kind of like English really isn't quite properly a language, but it's a usage of mixed up languages. Kind of like when you get, the Aramaic idiots, that are out there trying to say, well, the Aramaic is pure. Well, no, Aramaic and Hebrew are mixed together, just like American English is mixed together with a lot of other words, too. Languages do that. They mix multiple cultures together to come up with their communicative ability to talk to one another. And that's what happens with God talking to us sometimes. God says one thing, we go, oh, okay, I got it. God says, I am that I am. Moses says, oh, your name's I am. No, I am that I am. God, your name's YHWH. No, I am that I am. Just tell them what I am, and that I will be what I will be, and to my people I will be what I will be. Meaning that I will be their deliverer, I will be their salvation, I will be Jesus. As a matter of fact, if you really wanted a name for God, Jesus is about as close as you're going to get. And that's not even right. The Father is about as close as what we know God's name is, because Jesus said it. Jesus didn't say, let me tell them their private name. He just called him Abba. He called him Daddy. He called him Father. And so, really, there is no name of God. There are names of God personifying a lot of what he does. But when you have something that's bigger than you are, when you have something that's greater than you are, when you have someone who can't be understood, when you have someone that's humongous, and your conceptualization is so limited, putting a name on a person doesn't work. And that's the fact of the reality of God our Father. You can't put a name on him, because if you have seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. So the best thing is to say, well, the Father of Jesus, or the God of, and then you add your personal, intellectual, experiential knowledge of who he has been to you and how he has revealed himself and made himself known. But sadly, changing it from God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to God of Michael or Tom, Dick, and Harry, or the God of Beavis and Butthead isn't quite going to work the same now, is it? You could say the creator of the universe, but that almost doesn't work quite right anymore, because people are inventing their own ideas of that. And that's why it gets interesting when you use the word God, because what do you mean? I mean, I have to ask that, because on the one hand, I can talk to a born-again Christian, knows Jesus, talks about Jesus, has the terminology down, has the Christology down, has his hermeneutic and his homiletic, sort of, but then he tells me about God, and God is some distant, faraway being that doesn't intervene or doesn't have anything to do with tornadoes, Doesn't have anything to do with Taco Bell. Doesn't have anything to do with the hurricane, the typhoon, the flood, or anything else in the world. You know, kind of like what you've heard some Calvary Chapel pastors teach, or some Vineyard pastors, or even some Baptists teach. Well, God set the world in order, and then he stepped back, and now Satan is the god of this world, and Jesus died on the cross, but it's not effective yet until the actual happening in heaven where he takes back the title deed of the earth. But in the meantime, God doesn't intervene in a flood. God doesn't send locusts. God doesn't part Red Seas. God doesn't do these miraculous things. He only steps back and watches from a distance. Maybe your God's impotent, but that's not my God. That's a little g. I got a big G. Now, my big G, I don't know. I tend to have a God, or the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that my Savior, Jesus, the person that came down from heaven to earth and tells me and explains to me what his Father is like and wants me to know his Father and to know who sent him from heaven and what he's like, has told me that every hair on my head is counted. Now, is that made up? Now, that makes God pretty big and pretty smart. He's not just a big O in the sky that says, hey, I'm omnipotent, I'm omniscient, I'm the big O, you know, and I have these O, but okay, when it comes to anything else, I'm not personally involved. I'm not involved with that. That's just the curse. Really? That's why you can't explain when bad things happen to good people. You can't explain that? Really? Where did your God go? Well, God wasn't involved in World War II. No. God needs man. God put man in charge. God is using man instead. God got done with his son, cast him up into heaven, said, you're done, son. Now I'm taking over and putting these people in charge. Let them work it out. I'll inspire them once in a while, but God knows, we can't do anything. We don't have any hands and feet. We're just spirit. Dare I say, that may sound like an exaggeration to you, but that's what's being taught in most churches today. There's not the direct relation, the direct coordination, the direct communication of a living God. Hello? My God. I can use the old joke from the Southern California Christian Jesus movement. Are you ready for this? This is the Jesus movement in a nutshell. God gave me a parking spot. I prayed every day for that one, and I get it every time I pull in the parking spot. There it is, right there next to the front door. Oh, sorry, it's got a handicap there now. But at that time, it was my spot. I prayed for it. And yet God may do that for you sometimes because he does it for me. My wife just cracks up, and he's like, God must love you or something. I'm like, no, not really, but he's using it as an object lesson to teach somebody something, and I just kind of smile at her and grin and just go, no. So there's more to it than that, honey, but I can't explain to you right now. It has to be the Spirit applying it and using it for a reason to tell me that in this store also there's something that he wants me, that I've already prayed that if there's something there that you want me to get, that I can use in my life that's beneficial to me because I'm on such a limited budget, then God always opened the doors to it so that I can see by way of demonstration of coming in that I either have a peace about it or you've opened up a parking spot or you've done a certain number of things, any number of things that God does between him and I. And so that's how I live my life. In direct communication, direct observation of an observable means that's provable that the living God is alive and well and living on the planet Earth, in the planet Earth, above the planet Earth, in the heavens, and works through and around and circumferentially and circumstantially and interventionally in the world today. There used to be a book by Hal Lindsey that said, Satan is alive and well living on the planet Earth. I think we need a book now that says God is alive and well and living on the planet Earth. Some of you people don't seem to realize God is real. Yes. Just recently, I've been doing a lot of internet ministry. Okay, maybe last few years. A lot of internet ministry, and I told someone recently, I said, that I don't have much time to pray, but I said, one of the things I've noticed is that when Odin Fong's ministry of prayer, and then I was praying with them, and stuff, and a bunch of other people were getting healed. I mean, there were some serious prayer requests that were being miraculously answered. Now, when you see something like that happen, you don't go running around and say, and start telling everybody and you broadcast it all over the place. No, you just thank God for it and just keep doing it. That's all. But just saying, it's obvious in the miraculous when people say, well, that was God. The water stood on end and they walked on dry land. Because they wouldn't have believed it otherwise. A bunch of Jews, are you kidding me? They would have argued. Frankly, I think sometimes some people in our generation wouldn't believe even if they saw the water standing as a heap and walking on dry land through the Dead Sea. They'd still argue that somehow there was a gravitational flux and that somehow the juxtaposition of the moon and Venus and Mars was just such that a gravity well happened right there in the midst of the waters, and it parted them and caused them to be held back just long enough for the children of Israel to pass through without getting wet. Right. Nothing like sci-fi to mess up a good God. And that's what I don't understand. That's why I have to ask people, what do you mean God? In other words, they don't live like God is God. So, Wednesday's word is about, what do you mean by God? Do you live like God is God? Or do you just say a prayer and hope it goes there and somehow you believe that maybe it'll be there? I hope so. Hope deferred, is not hope referred. And guess what? Because God heard the word, did it happen? Or won't it happen? Or will it happen? And, we can't live that way because after all, we'd be some kind of Pentecostal wacko. Kind of like some of the recent writers that inspire us in devotions. Even A.W. Tozer said that the biggest fear of evangelicalism is that God is real, because it'll mess up their plans. Because the evangelical is getting into the world rather than renouncing the world and allowing God to work in their life, to be revealed as the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the children of Abraham by faith, knowing that God is real and God will do these things and that they have power in their life. They have the obvious manifestations of not just the fruit of the Spirit, but the demonstration of signs and wonders that's accompanying those who believe. And that was Tozer warning this generation. And I got news for you. I see signs and wonders every day, man. I'm kind of blessed out of my mind. I just kind of wonder, well, God, is that why you kept me hid away? So that nobody else could see it today? Because if they don't realize that you're alive and real and they've been given all this wealth of biblical knowledge, what are they saying about you then? What are they telling people? Is it like patronizing them? And then I heard recently, no offense to Greg, but, I heard Greg try to explain about why some child died or something, and I know he went through a tragedy with his children, and then, I heard Rick went through some tragedies, and he's dealing with it, and I thought, any of you ever look at it like it's a benefit? Like, not just to the person that died, that they're gone and they went to heaven. Praise the Lord, I'm happy for that. But you needed, like, maybe some object lesson here? When Jesus was born, all the children in his city were killed. Hello? So I'm not quite also sympathetic sometimes about some of the things that I hear when people are making the big G into a little g and they don't know how to answer stupid questions like, why does bad things happen to good people? Well, first of all, they're not good people, and bad things aren't bad things because they're good things, because God takes that bad thing that you think is bad, which is only your perspective on it, not God's, and God makes it a good thing because he's using it to teach you, to reach you, to appreciate the fact that he's in control and you're not. That, yes, he's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. Sing it! He's got the whole world in his hands. Brothers, sisters, come on. Where's your G in God? If I'm Jewish, I say, where's your V in God? That's why you change it to a W, because you don't know where he is, who he is, what he is, or why, or how. Okay, maybe how isn't a W. But that's why they put the W in the Yahweh, because they don't know who, they don't know what, they don't know why, and they're still trying to figure out where their God went. They're having a spasm attack because God's not there. Yeah, no kidding. What G are you talking about? Yud Hey Vav Hey. I am that I am. I will be that I will be. I will reveal myself. I will reveal my Son. I will make known my Son. And the Spirit of God says he will reveal Jesus to us. So Wednesday's word really is, what have you heard? I mean, I know what you've heard because you got these little G's running around all over the place. You know, there's G-men, and those aren't government men. Those are guys that are acting like gods. You know, your football stars, you got them on a pedestal. Your worship leaders, you got them on pedestals. Sometimes some of you got pastors on pedestals. They're all gods, but they'll die like men because, after all, look where they're at. Elevated, highlight, spotlight. Does God get that? Well, we go in our quiet little room in the back in the dark and pray. Oh, God. And you hope that he answers. Man, I'd be out there jumping and stomping and romping and saying, hey, God, guess what? They want to see. Do it. And walk away. And watch you see that God moves. Fire from heaven. Because it's about to happen real soon. Great Tribulation isn't just a, we're waiting for the rapture and we're going to ignore the Great Tribulation. Great Tribulation is a wake-up call that God reveals himself in the Ezekiel war back to his people. When God decides to terminate the armies that are gathered in the north that are coming against Israel, he says, I reveal myself to my people by eliminating a third of them. Not the people, the ones coming against his people. God does it. Not an army, not the United States of America's Army, Air Force, Marines, and somebody coming in, you know, like a SEAL Team 6 or something foolish and stupid, you know, that you've got to live practically with what you can see. No, God doesn't. God just says, hey, I'll reveal it. Watch this. Bam! And he'll annihilate them. And he's done it a variety of ways. If you look through the Old Testament, God has eliminated armies with a bee. Yeah, he sent a bee and put an army en route. Did you know that? A bee. One bee. God has sent angels and destroyed an army. Elisha laying in his bed. One man. 2 angels. Poof. Toast. So, can I ask a question? When you're teaching when these pastors are teaching about the big G, and they're telling people to join the army because God needs you in the army to protect America, what kind of God do you serve? What big G or little g are you really following? What is your theology saying about God as being God? Or really, are you ready to admit that you got a bad rap going? And you got a bad theology about the big G when you put a W in where a V is, and the reason why you got a W is somebody, Satan, was sitting in the backseat going, they can't even say his name. Everybody knows it's Daddy. Well, okay. Well, I'm sorry, but we just don't know because God hasn't answered us personally. Or has he? You see, Jesus has already made it known that the widows and the orphans are heard by God. Jesus has made it known that even the children that have been refused from American soil, give me your tithe, you're poor. No, that's not what we say. You're undocumented, get away. The church is meant to be, bring me those undocumented, and I will make them documented. You go down there and invite a child into your home. Then tell me what the big G can do and the little g. Because you've left your first love, and that's Jesus. So I don't doubt that you might not know who God is, because God is coming soon to reveal himself to the world. And he's going to pour out his wrath upon it, because they haven't acknowledged God. Oh, yeah, I mean, the church has played its game about trying to make God fill his place that the church has put him in. But you know and I know that we're not talking about people walking along saying, hey, I know God. I talk to God every day. I prayed for this and that happened. Oh, well, that's those Pentecostals. We don't like them. Well, that's like one of those guys from, like Mr. Shiny Smiley Face, that puts on the big show up front, and You know, he can't be right. His God can't be our God because he doesn't talk about hell and everything else because he's always talking about love and acceptance from God. God can't be performing miracles for him and not us because we know our Bible. Right? After all, just like the Jews, we know who God is. He does what we say. Okay, so what is God to you? That's your Wednesday's word of homework assignment. I know my God. I know my Father. When I first got saved, I went out of my way to learn the difference between, okay, Father. I said, okay, God. I get it that I can't know you except through Jesus. Now I've been saved, so I kind of got this spirit thing down. Not really, but I'll accept that part. Only because I was told. And then later I learned better, and now I go, boy, do we really mess up the Spirit of God. Phew. I don't even want to go there, but I'm giving forever teaching that's called the VidDevo Spirit that talks about the Spirit of God and going to keep going. And we started with Chuck's book and going to keep going, but believe me, there's more about the Spirit of God we don't know than we do know. And that's what I love about Francis Chan is that there's more about God you don't know than what you think you do know because no, you don't know, and that's a fact. And that's what Chan says. Hey, you know, you take your Bible and you start looking through this and you go, I don't think we got it all down, folks. Because if you're sitting in a pew doing what you do, is that really what Jesus said? I mean, you might want to reread. And so he's saying, frankly, God might be doing a little more than that. There's more in here than you think. And so that's why I say to you about what the word for Wednesday is. What are you doing about learning to get rid of the W and put the V back in God? Because the V in God would start somewhere where at least you're being a little more accurate. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Because here's an interesting thing. Before I recorded this, and this is a new teaching. Are you ready for this? Brand new teaching. Oh no, he's going to be a cult. He's going to come up with something new. Well, maybe. Who knows? Jesus started a cult. I might as well too. There's a lot of Christians out there going, oh boy, we need to crucify that guy. Or just ignore him and put him friendless, on Facebook or wherever. When you try saying Yud Hey Vav Hey. Did you see that? If you were trying to do something, or to imitate something, or to create an effect, let's say, for the sake of argument. Oh, you need two to argue. That's right. Sorry. Okay. For the sake of argument, let's say that you hear the word wind. What do you picture? Really? You got a picture of a wind? Really? You can picture the wind. Can you show me that? I want to see it. Or are you picturing the effects of the wind? As the wind affects a tree, it wiggles. I love that little wiggle in your walk. That ain't the wind, honey. Sorry, never mind. But no, the wind blows and the tree goes. It's kind of like effect. So the atmospheric pressurization of the highs and the lows create this kind of like strong whirling effect of the barometric pressure that causes, heat, cold, and all this to cause the molecules to move quicker or slower, and you get this, what we call wind, right? So, when I say, can you see the wind? Can you? No, you can't. But you know kind of the effects of it, but you don't know where it's coming from or where it's going, but you plan it out, kind of, sort of, figure it out, maybe, kind of. No, you don't. So, if I wanted you to describe the wind, you would describe for me the effects of the wind. Now, could you make a wind sound for me? Now, there's one famous wind sound that we have all over comic books. Now, we have it all over lots of textings. We have it all over other places. It's called whoosh. Now, I get the whoosh, because that's back to the W. You see, anytime I'm talking to Gentiles, I understand that they got W's all over the place. You know, they want to know who, what, when, where, how, why. Okay, they got an H in there once in a while, but they got W's. You know, it's kind of like they're fixated on W's. Why? I don't know. Maybe there's a Jewish Gentile kind of Gentile word that has a W in it that fits Gentiles. But even Jesus warned about Gentiles. You know, they're always kind of like, they want to be lords, they want to be gods, they want to be in charge, they want to do this, they want to do that. You know, kind of like evangelicals, right? You know, they want to be gods and die like men. You know, little G's, and sorry. That's what a Gentile is. That's why they're G's. And, yeah, you're getting it. You get the picture why Jesus warned about Gentiles? No, don't be that way. But the whoosh sound is to describe the wind as it blows in a given place in a given time that you hear. Did you know that in Jewish mysticism there is a sound for the breath of God? Did you know that in Jewish mysticism, we're saying mysticism, but I want to say in Jewish scholarly writings, I want to say in ancient texts, I want to say in YHWH, you have the breath of God. And if you could receive it, then you'd realize that Jewish culture isn't excluding the consonants that are meant to go in there, like an eh, or a o, or a u, or a ah, so that you would come up with Yahovah, or Yahoveh, or Yehovah, or Yehoveh, or Yehovu, or Yehovah, whatever. Mix up all the consonants, you can figure it out. But I got one for you. When I talk to God, and I would talk to him just, and I'm pointing over here because it was just before I walked over here and started recording. I said, Father, I'm talking about you, God, you know, and you know God better than I do, because you're God. So I said, you know, people have already heard the Yud Hey Vav Hey, you know, they're all tired of me saying the V and the W thing, you know, and sure, I can talk and let the Spirit of God lead me in the direction you want me to go, and we can talk about Jesus and how he's the physical manifestation of the Spirit of God, and in him dwelleth the fullness of God bodily, and that if there was a physical form that God the Father would take, it would look like Jesus, be Jesus, and is Jesus in his glory. But, you know, we won't really get across the idea of big G versus little g, and SG versus, you know, SG being Spirit of God and being Son of God. But, you know, we get it, God, so we want to get the big G back into the G. So God says, well, tell them about Yud Hey Vav Hey. And I was like, well, what do you mean? It wasn't exactly the way he said it, but I'm paraphrasing, because personally, me and God, we have a way of talking, and it's kind of fun, and I like it. Personally, it's kind of, I get a kick out of it. It's like, ooh, it gives me goosebumps. I kind of go, ooh, you know, and I'm ready for my flesh to just perish, because my spirit is going, yeah. Ooh, I'm even going, like, my hairs are standing on my hair right now. See? Standing. Can I just enjoy the moment for a moment? I mean, come on now. What do you do when the Spirit of God goes, whoosh? You go, ha. Don't you? All right, fine, you're weird. Or maybe you just haven't had it without many. Maybe you feel that different. But when the Spirit of God wants to describe himself as the breath of God that is breathed into man to become a living soul, that's what's recorded for you. The Yud Hey of that's God. Yeah. In a way you wouldn't even imagine. Because I got news for you. There's Christians running around with this really bad idea. You know, I always get these bad theologies, and I always ask God, I say, first thing right off the bat, I hear it and I go, that's not right. You know, like they'll say, a Christian marriage is between a man and a woman, blah, period. No, it's not. Or a godly marriage is between a man and a woman. No, it's not. Or this is what God intended marriage to be, between a man and a woman. No, it's not. You left God out. It's a tripartite covenant. It is the aspect of God in man, and man in God becoming one in the Spirit, one in the Lord, one in the faith, one marriage, unity of one, the oneness of God, the Elohim. That's what a marriage is. It's a demonstration of the reality of Jesus and the church, or God and his people. Oneness. That means that not just two people getting sex or having intercourse is what God intended when it comes to the physicality of the union of God, man, and woman together as one. That's what God's marriage is. That's what a real marriage is, and no one's teaching it. It is God in the midst, and he is the head of the marriage. He is the one that is holding out two hands, one on the left, one on the right, like a triangle, pulling them both up to become one with him, in union together as they become closer to him, become closer to each other. The stupidity of the humanity of trying to make humanism the answer by putting a man on one side and a woman on the other side will never solve the issue that, yes, over 50% of Christian marriages are ending in divorce and have been divorced and has been that way for a long time now. And now there's some foolish person selling a book and a theme and trying to tell Christians, and a lot of them buying into it, oh, well, you know, the statistics weren't right, you know. Buy my book and you'll find out the truth. Do you get the picture? Follow the money? And even they don't teach about God. Well, God gave a covenant, you know, now you're, you know, and they kind of step aside, you know, and walk away from the reality. God and that woman that you married. God and me that married. That means there's three people there. You could say four, but we're not going to play games there. God is in both. And if there's the Spirit of God in both, that means factually it's a tripartite or a Elohim of the unity of God manifested in the marriage. That's what a marriage is. Don't ever take God out of the picture in the equation and go around running telling people to some poor, impoverished, spiritually bankrupt, humanistic type of teaching that you want to try to make two people force themselves to get along all through the days of their life, that God is changing each one, and he's hanging on to one and hanging on the other and saying, hey, push me, pull you, but you know what? You guys are having a hard time hanging together as a marriage. I'm hanging on to both of you. You know, and I'm trying to pull you together on the top of the pyramid. Yeah. The closer you get to God, the closer you are to each other. So, you know, it's my pet peeve, but, you know, that's why what happens when you take God, the big G, out of the picture of marriage. When you take God out of the picture of the Bible, then you quit getting the big G. You get this little g, then you start putting W's in to wonder, where did God go? Why did God do it? How did God do it? What's God doing? And coming up with stupid conclusions, like when bad things happen to good people. Because God did it. Period. Big G. God is in control. That's the point. Where is your God? He is in control. Because not even one hair on your head or one sparrow falls to the ground except God knows it, and God allows it, and God has done it, and God uses it. So I got news for you. It's not Yahweh. It's not even Yahweh. The Jews were wrong. Moses was wrong. God was trying to make a point here. I am that I am. I exist. That's what I mean. It's not I am and go around telling everybody, hey, I am's coming, I am's coming, I am. No. He exists. Always has, always will. And the YHWH is just the breath of God. That's all. It's a beautiful way of personifying when God gave life to man and he became a living soul. He became a living soul. And if you want to write it down, then you put YHWH and then try to say it. It's an expiation of the breath of God from his nostrils, so to speak, from his mouth to that lungs that gave breath and life into the being that became man in creation. Now, of course, that's a Jewish way of looking at it. Now, it happens to be my perspective on appreciating it. It happens to be what God told me before I walked in here. But hey, you can reject that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you like your little G. My God's bigger than your God. My God's bigger than yours. My God's bigger because he's in control of everything. My God's bigger than yours. My God is. You know how I know? Because every time that I put God bigger and greater, I keep thinking more and more and greater and bigger and wider and stronger and more and outer and wonderful and just beyond comprehension and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm a sci-fi nut, so I'm going bigger and bigger. So I give him more ability, more power, more strength, more O's than you even conceive of. Nobody has as many O's for God as I do. I got O's that people haven't even imagined yet. But I said, well, that doesn't cover that. What about this one? I got to put another O on there. And I come up with words that aren't even yet covering the O's because I'm kind of into, have you heard of like quantum physics? Hey, I got quantum theology. Hello? Yeah, I'm way beyond most people. I'm thinking like, well, God's bigger. We ought to think bigger. So I came up with integral specificity just to handle the minutiae of the reality of why systemic theology is false and why it's just a Western idea and it's not an Eastern idea and how it's wrong and how it makes failure of what it comes to the conclusion of because it's discovering and it's trying to uncover about God but not with God. Yeah, systemic theology fails because it's about God but not in God or of God or with God. Those three things are outside of systemic theology. Think about it. Go look it up. You'll figure it out. But if you could adapt it, you might come up with your own manifestation of a pragmatic way of arranging your examination or appreciation of the revelation of what God is doing. Because that's what the Bible is. It's the revelation of God to us, of himself, about his Son, and what he has done for us. And so the big G has given us his word. And I kind of like keeping him the big G and keeping everyone else little g's with what they're doing because, my God, they are acting like gods nowadays, but they're going to die right now. So that's your Wednesday's word for the word that you've heard, and that's the word for Wednesday. God is in control. God is the God of, because of what he deals with and how he deals with those and whatever you put the God of. Like people will add the words, and that's what the Hebraic does. Hebrew always manifests itself by what God has done, by giving honor and glory to him. For instance, Bethel, the house of God, because God revealed himself in the house at that time. So the phrase would be the house that God revealed himself in, or the house of God in the God in the house of. And it would be more of a phrase as opposed to definitive. Greek is definitive and wants to be pragmatic to, isolatory thought, where it just makes a dichotomy of two opposing or two practical realities that this is trying to define them. Hebrew doesn't. Hebrew leaves a lot of it open-ended because God is bigger than Hebrew. So there are concepts that are written in Hebrew theology that, quite frankly, says things like, when you talk about eternal life, it's ages to ages to ages to ages life. It's not eternal. It's ages to ages to ages to ages. There's a reason why. But that's another Wednesday word. God bless you. I hope you enjoyed this study on God and the Word for Wednesday.